Aria Scuderi's 18th birthday was supposed to mark her first step into freedom, but instead, it marked the end of her choices. The daughter of a powerful Chicago Mafia boss, she had grown up shielded from the violence that built her family's empire, yet trapped in its shadows. On the day she thought she might finally taste independence, her father informed her that she would marry Luca Vitiello, the ruthless heir to the New York mob, a man whispered about in both fear and fascination. She begged for another fate, but her pleas meant nothing. Her father called it business, a strategic alliance between two families sworn in blood, but to Aria it was a betrayal deeper than any wound. He reminded her that she should be grateful, that he could have given away her younger sister Gianna instead. And with that single threat, Aria's resistance broke. To protect Gianna, she accepted the marriage, surrendering her dreams of love to a life ruled by violence. Luca met her at the altar with the calm confidence of a man used to taking what he wanted. His eyes were dark and unreadable, his presence commanding, and though she trembled in his shadow, she forced herself to lift her chin and meet his gaze. The vows were spoken, the kiss claimed, and in the eyes of their world, they were bound. To everyone else, it was a union of power. To Aria, it was captivity. That night, surrounded by men who celebrated deals more than love, she saw what kind of world she had married into. When another man dared to touch her, Luca's fury was merciless. He punished him publicly, making it clear that Aria now belonged to him alone. Yet when they were finally alone, the monster she had feared showed restraint. He refused to take her innocence, instead cutting his own hand and staining the sheets with his blood so their families would believe the marriage consummated. Aria didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. The man who spared her was still capable of cruelty, and she could not tell if his mercy came from compassion or control. Days turned into weeks of uneasy silence and stolen glances. Luca's world was one of command and obedience, and he expected her to fit neatly into the role of his wife, but Aria's quiet strength refused to bend. Beneath her fear, she was defiant, unwilling to be merely decoration in his empire. Luca noticed. He had expected a timid girl and found instead a woman whose fire both challenged and fascinated him. That fascination turned to jealousy when his former lover Grace reappeared, flaunting her knowledge of Luca's past and mocking Aria's innocence. The confrontation ended with Luca's fury blazing. He banished Grace from their world, declaring Aria his and his alone. For the first time, Aria saw that his violence, however brutal, came from a twisted sense of protection. It terrified her, yet deep within her chest, a seed of something dangerous began to grow. Curiosity, sympathy, even desire. The walls between them began to crack. The days that followed drew Aria deeper into the life she had sworn never to accept. Luca's power extended through New York like a shadow, and she found herself living inside his fortress, surrounded by men who would kill at his command. At first, she lived in silence, her fear wrapped tight around her like armor. Yet every time he spoke to her, every time his eyes softened without warning, she saw something that contradicted the image of a monster. He was ruthless with the world, but careful with her. He watched her reactions, studied her defiance, and though his touch still carried dominance, it began to lose its cruelty. When Aria dared to speak her mind, he listened. When she broke the rules to see her sister, he didn't punish her. He surprised her by arranging it himself. She began to see pieces of a man beneath the air, someone who might have been kind if not molded by blood and loyalty. Still, his jealousy remained dangerous. He couldn't stand other men even looking at her, and his possessiveness flared like a warning fire each time she drew breath beyond his control. Yet Aria no longer cowered. She pushed back. When he hurt her pride, she challenged him, forcing Luca to confront emotions he had long buried. Grace returned one last time to humiliate Aria in public, but the attempt backfired. Luca's wrath consumed the betrayal, and before everyone, he declared Aria the only woman who would ever matter to him. That was the night she realized he would destroy the world to protect her. Later, when he finally bled out the truth of his past, the mother who had taken her own life rather than endure a forced marriage, Aria saw the wound that had shaped him. The boy who had been taught that love was weakness had grown into a man who feared it, and in her presence, that fear began to unravel. She touched the scar he hid behind arrogance, and for the first time, Luca let her in. That night, her resistance crumbled, and what began as a marriage forged in violence turned into something real. She gave herself to him willingly, not because of duty, but because she wanted to. The monster she had feared became the man she desired. Their connection ignited into passion so consuming that neither could tell where love began and power ended. But life in the mafia never allowed peace for long. As Aria grew stronger, she refused to remain a silent wife. When threats against their family rose, she proved her intelligence, predicting moves before they happened, earning even Luca's hardened respect. He began to call her partner, and though he still tried to protect her from danger, she refused to hide behind his name. Their bond, once fragile, became unbreakable, until the Russians made their move. One night, Aria was taken, kidnapped by the Bratva to lure Luca into a trap. Tied, terrified, and facing death, she realized the depth of her love for the man she once despised. She begged her captors to spare him, offering herself in exchange. But Luca was already coming for her, fury and desperation burning through every drop of blood he shed on the way. When he burst into the room, gunfire roared like thunder. He killed for her, bled for her, and though he nearly lost his life, he saved her from the hands that meant to break her. When it was over, he fell into her arms, whispering that for her, he would die 1,000 times. Aria held him, trembling, realizing she no longer feared the monster. She loved him. In the aftermath of the rescue, the echoes of gunfire faded, but the bond between Aria and Luca solidified into something neither of them could undo. The walls that had kept them apart finally collapsed, and in their place rose a fierce kind of devotion built on survival and truth. Aria nursed him through his wounds, her trembling hands learning the rhythm of his heartbeat, realizing how close she had come to losing him. He called her his princess, his wife, his reason for drawing breath in a world of blood. She scolded him for risking everything, yet when he touched her, the words melted away. In the silence that followed the chaos, Luca admitted what he had never told anyone, that he loved her. The confession was rough, almost broken, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of pain. Aria's heart ached for the boy inside the man, the one who had watched his mother die, who had been taught that love was a weakness that could get you killed. She kissed him and told him that love was not weakness, that it was the only thing strong enough to save him. From that night on, they became inseparable. He stopped hiding behind control, and she stopped hiding behind fear. Together they led the familia through war and peace, side by side rather than apart. Aria's strength astonished everyone. Once a girl forced into marriage, she now walked through the halls of power as Luca's equal. When danger threatened again, she stood beside him in meetings, her insight sharper than many of the men who had served the mafia their entire lives. Luca began to depend on her, not only for counsel but for calm. Her presence steadied the monster within him, and though he would always be capable of violence, with her he learned restraint. There were still nights when his past returned, when ghosts of his mother and the blood he'd spilled haunted his dreams, and Aria would pull him close and remind him that he was more than the life he had been born into. He began to believe her. When he proposed to her again, it was not in a grand display before their families, but in the quiet of their home, beneath the same vow that had once chained them. This time it was a promise made freely. He told her that he wanted her not as a symbol or an obligation, but as his partner in every sense. He promised to bleed for her, to protect her, to love her until death. And she, who once swore she would never love the man she married, said yes with her whole heart. Born in blood, sworn in blood until death, they both whispered it again, but this time it was no longer a curse. It was their truth. Together, they rebuilt the meaning of their world. Aria taught Luca compassion, Luca taught Aria strength. Their love, once forged from fear and necessity, became a story of redemption and devotion that even the mafia could not taint. Though their empire still thrived on power and loyalty, its king and queen ruled with something far more dangerous: love. And in the quiet, after years of fire and blood, when the city slept and their enemies were only memories, Luca would look at his wife and remember the girl he had met at an altar, trembling yet unbroken. She had been his salvation, disguised as sacrifice. Aria would smile, tracing the scar on his hand, the same one that had bled for her the night he spared her innocence. They were bound not just by vows, but by every choice they had made to defy the destiny written for them. It began as a transaction, a deal between two families that saw her as a tool and him as a weapon, but it ended as something pure and irrevocable. Love had found its place among the ashes, and against all odds, it survived. Their story, once born in violence, became a legend whispered through the underworld, a reminder that even in a life built on sin and blood, redemption was possible. Aria Scuderi Vitiello, the girl who married a monster, became the woman who taught him to be human. And Luca Vitiello, the man who ruled by fear, became the one who learned to love. And as the years passed through peace and storm alike, their vow remained unbroken. Born in blood, sworn in blood, until death and beyond. Years later, the city had changed, but their world remained built on shadows. The Vitiello Empire stood stronger than ever, not just because of fear, but because of the unity that Aria and Luca had forged. They no longer ruled through terror alone. They ruled with a balance of loyalty, honor, and love. Their story had become a quiet legend whispered through the ranks of men who once believed that hearts had no place in their business. In the stillness of dawn, Luca would rise before the world awoke, watching Aria sleep beside him, her hand resting over the scar he carried from the night he saved her. That mark, once proof of brutality, had become a symbol of everything he had gained and everything he would never lose. She stirred and smiled, her voice soft and teasing, reminding him that even kings must rest. And for the first time in his life, he did. For Aria, the girl who once trembled beneath a man she thought was a monster, had learned that even in darkness, love could bloom. For Luca, the man who once swore he could never love, had found his peace in the woman who made him human. Born in blood, sworn in blood, they had defied fate itself and rewritten their story into something eternal.